Rebecca Martinez had always been different from the other women in Fort Collins. While they spent their days gossiping over needlework and complaining about the harsh Colorado Territory life, she found herself drawn to the vast wilderness that stretched beyond their small settlement. Her father, Colonel James Martinez, commanded the local garrison and had raised her with military discipline after her mother died of consumption when Rebecca was 12. Now 22, she possessed an independent spirit that both worried and frustrated her father. The trouble began on a sweltering August morning in 1878 when Apache raids had been reported near the mining camps to the south. Colonel Martinez called an emergency meeting with his officers and the town council, leaving Rebecca to tend to their small general store. She was organizing supplies when the bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see a man unlike any she'd encountered in their settlement. He stood tall and lean, with bronze skin and long black hair tied back with a leather cord. His clothes were a mixture of traditional Apache dress and items clearly traded from white settlements' buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, and moccasins that made no sound as he moved. What struck Rebecca most were his eyes, dark and intelligent, holding none of the hostility she'd been taught to expect from the Apache people. "I need supplies," he said simply, his English clear but accented. "I have pelts to trade." Rebecca knew she should refuse him, should call for the guards, should do any number of things her father had instructed her to do if Apache came to the settlement. Instead, she found herself saying, "Show me what you have." His name was Joseph Running Bear, though he told her his Apache name was Nalnish, meaning he works. He had been educated at a mission school as a boy before returning to his people, which explained his command of English. As she examined his beautiful beaver and elk pelts, he studied her with equal curiosity. "You are the colonel's daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am." She kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "Does that concern you?" "Should it concern me?" he replied, and something in his tone made her look up. Their eyes met and held, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest. The transaction was completed in relative silence, but there was an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with their people's conflict. When Joseph left, Rebecca found herself watching through the window until he disappeared into the tree line. She told herself it was prudent to monitor potential threats, but she knew she was lying. He returned 3 weeks later, this time bringing turquoise jewelry crafted by the women in his band. Rebecca had been hoping he would come back, though she hadn't admitted it even to herself. This time their conversation lasted longer. He told her about his people's summer camp in the mountains, about the freedom of moving with the seasons, about a way of life that seemed impossibly different from her own. "Why do you come here?" she asked finally. "Surely there are other trading posts." "This is the only one where I am treated as a man rather than a threat." he said quietly. Their clandestine meetings continued through the fall. Joseph would appear at the store when her father was away on patrol, and they would talk while conducting their trading business. Rebecca learned that he was considered a peace chief among his people, someone who believed accommodation with the whites was necessary for Apache survival. She shared her own frustrations about the limited role women were expected to play in frontier society, her dreams of seeing more of the world beyond Fort Collins. The turning point came in November. Joseph arrived at the store badly wounded, with a bullet in his shoulder and fever burning in his eyes. Rebecca knew she should turn him away, should report his presence to her father. Instead, she locked the store and helped him to the small room behind the shop where she sometimes took inventory. "Soldiers," he whispered as she examined his wound. "Not your father's men, others from the south. They attacked our winter camp." Rebecca's hands shook as she cleaned the wound. She had basic medical knowledge from helping the fort's doctor with injured soldiers, but she'd never operated alone. The bullet had to come out, and Joseph was losing too much blood. "You need a real doctor," she said. "Cannot trust the fort doctor. He would report me." "Then you might die." Joseph caught her hand with his good one. "Better to die free than live as a prisoner." Rebecca met his eyes and made a decision that would change everything. She heated a knife blade over the oil lamp and extracted the bullet herself, Joseph biting down on a leather strap to muffle his cries. She bandaged the wound with torn petticoats and gave him laudanum from the store's medical supplies. For 3 days she nursed him back to health in secret. During his fever he spoke in Apache, and she wished she could understand. When he was lucid, they talked about everything, their childhoods, their fears, their hopes for a future that seemed increasingly impossible. On the third night, as Joseph slept fitfully on a bedroll she'd made, Rebecca sat beside him watching his face in the lamplight. She realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with this man. Not just attraction or fascination, but the deep, soul-deep love her mother had once described. When Joseph woke the next morning, his fever had broken. He found Rebecca asleep in a chair beside him, her hand resting near his. He studied her face, the strong jawline she'd inherited from her father, the soft lips, the sun-touched skin that marked her as a true frontier woman. He had been fighting his own feelings for weeks, knowing how impossible their situation was. But seeing her exhausted from caring for him, risking everything to save his life, he couldn't deny the truth any longer. "Rebecca," he said softly, and she woke immediately. "How do you feel?" she asked, instantly alert and checking his forehead for fever. "Better, thanks to you." He caught her hand as she pulled it away. "Why did you help me?" She could have given him a dozen practical reasons, but in that moment she chose honesty. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Joseph squeezed her hand gently. "This is dangerous for both of us," he said. "I know. Your father would kill me if he knew. I know. My people would not understand. I know." She looked directly into his eyes. "Do you want me to pretend I don't feel what I feel?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Then he brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "No," he said, "I cannot pretend either." Their love affair began that morning, conducted in absolute secrecy and constant danger. Joseph would come to the store when her father was away, and they would steal whatever moments they could. Sometimes they would meet in the woods outside town, finding small clearings where they could talk and hold each other without fear of discovery. Rebecca learned Apache words and phrases. Joseph taught her to track animals and read weather signs. She showed him books from her father's library, sharing the wider world through literature and maps. They built a relationship that existed in the spaces between their two worlds, belonging fully to neither but creating something entirely their own. The danger only intensified their feelings. Every meeting could be their last. Every goodbye might be forever. They lived for the moments when they could simply be together, when the conflict between their peoples faded into background noise. By Christmas, Rebecca knew she was irreversibly, completely in love. She also knew that their secret couldn't last forever. In a small frontier town, someone would eventually notice her absences, her distraction, the way she glowed after Joseph's visits. That someone turned out to be Thomas Whitman, the town's banker and her father's choice for her eventual husband. Thomas had been courting Rebecca with all the persistence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. She had been politely deflecting his advances for months, but Thomas interpreted her distraction as maidenly shyness rather than complete disinterest. It was Thomas who followed her into the woods on a cold December afternoon. He had called at the store to invite her to the Christmas social, found it closed, and spotted her walking toward the tree line. Thinking to surprise her with a romantic gesture, he followed at a distance. Instead, he witnessed Rebecca meeting Joseph in a small clearing, saw them embrace passionately, heard them speaking together in a mixture of English and Apache. Thomas watched in shock and growing rage as the colonel's daughter kissed an Apache warrior with obvious love and familiarity. Thomas retreated without revealing himself, his mind racing. His first instinct was to run immediately to Colonel Martinez, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the calculating part of his nature that had made him successful in business. This information was valuable, and he wanted to consider how best to use it. That night he lay awake planning. Simply reporting Rebecca's relationship would end it, but it would also likely end Rebecca. Colonel Martinez was a hard man who would see his daughter's actions as the ultimate betrayal. Thomas still wanted to marry Rebecca, partly for her inheritance, and partly because he genuinely desired her. Perhaps there was a way to use this knowledge to his advantage. The next morning, Thomas visited Rebecca at the store. He found her humming while she worked, her face glowing with happiness. The sight of it made his jaw clench. "You seem particularly cheerful today, Miss Martinez," he said casually. "It's a beautiful day," she replied, not looking up from her inventory. "Indeed. I was wondering if you might accompany me to the Christmas social next week. I know your father would approve of the match." Rebecca finally looked at him, her expression growing serious. "Thomas, I've told you before that I'm not ready for courtship." "Not ready, or not interested in the right man?" he asked, his tone carrying an undertone that made her look at him more sharply. "I'm simply not ready for marriage to anyone," she said firmly. Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps you're waiting for someone who could never give you the life you deserve, someone who could only bring you danger and disgrace." Rebecca felt her blood chill, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know about your Apache lover, Rebecca. I've seen you with him." The color drained from Rebecca's face, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I don't know what you think you saw, but—" "I saw you kissing him. I heard you speaking his heathen language. I watched you betray everything your father stands for." Thomas's voice was cold now, all pretense of gentleness gone. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Rebecca's mind raced. Denial was useless now. "What do you want?" "I want you to marry me, properly, publicly, with your father's blessing. In exchange, your secret dies with me." "And if I refuse?" Thomas's smile was cruel. "Then I tell your father everything, and we both know what happens to Apache lovers in this territory." Rebecca stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the man beneath the civilized exterior. "You would destroy me to have me." "I would save you from destroying yourself. Marriage to me is your only chance at redemption." The trap was perfect and inescapable. Rebecca knew her father's reputation for dealing with those who aided the Apache. She also knew that Joseph would be in mortal danger if their relationship became public knowledge. Any chance of his peaceful coexistence with the white settlers would be destroyed. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have until New Year's Day. Give me your answer at the social, or I give your father mine." Thomas left her standing in the store, her hands shaking and her mind reeling. She had a week to find a solution, or she would lose everything that mattered to her. That evening, Rebecca sat in her room staring out at the mountains where Joseph's people made their winter camp. She couldn't meet with him again. The risk was too great now that Thomas was watching. But she also couldn't marry Thomas and condemn herself to a life of misery while Joseph waited for her to return. There had to be another way. There had to be. As snow began to fall outside her window, Rebecca Martinez began to plan the most dangerous gamble of her life. Rebecca spent the next 3 days in agony, unable to contact Joseph and unwilling to accept Thomas's ultimatum. Her father noticed her distraction but attributed it to pre-holiday nerves. The fort was busy preparing for potential Apache raids during the winter months, giving her some breathing room from his scrutiny. On the fourth day, salvation came from an unexpected source. Mary Clearwater, a half-Apache woman who worked as a translator for the Army, approached Rebecca at the store. Mary had always been friendly but distant, walking the difficult line between two worlds much as Rebecca now found herself doing. "You look troubled, child," Mary said quietly, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Just tired," Rebecca replied, but something in Mary's knowing eyes made her reconsider. "Mary, if someone found themselves caught between two worlds, what would you advise them to do?" Mary studied her for a long moment. That would depend on what they wanted most, safety or happiness. What if they could have neither? Then they might have to create a third option. Mary leaned closer. Sometimes the only way out is through. That evening, Mary returned to the store just before closing. "Walk with me," she said simply. They made their way to the edge of town, where Mary stopped and turned to Rebecca. "Joseph, Running Bear, asked me to give you a message. He says the winter wind carries news of danger, and he wants to know if the mountain flower still blooms." Rebecca's heart leaped. Joseph was safe, and he had found a way to communicate with her. "Tell him the flower blooms but faces a hard frost. Tell him," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "tell him the flower may need to find new soil to survive." Mary nodded. "He also said to tell you that a warrior's heart knows no boundaries, and sometimes the bravest action is the one that seems impossible." Over the next 2 days, Rebecca and Joseph exchanged messages through Mary. They developed a code that allowed them to communicate their desperate situation without putting Mary at risk if the messages were intercepted. Through this system, Rebecca learned that Joseph's band was planning to move deeper into the mountains after the first thaw, seeking a place where they could live in peace away from both hostile soldiers and other Apache bands who favored continued warfare. Joseph proposed something that took Rebecca's breath away. He wanted her to come with him, not just for a visit, but permanently. He would speak to his people about accepting her into the band. It would mean giving up everything she had ever known, but it would also mean freedom to be together without fear. The proposal terrified and exhilarated Rebecca in equal measure. She had read stories of white women living among Apache, though most ended tragically. But she also knew that her current situation was equally impossible. Thomas's deadline was approaching, and she could see no other escape. On December 30th, the day before the Christmas social where she was supposed to give Thomas her answer, Rebecca made her decision. She sent word to Joseph through Mary. She would meet him at midnight on New Year's Eve at the old mining claim north of town. From there, they would travel to his people's winter camp, and she would throw her lot in with his. Rebecca spent New Year's Eve day preparing for her escape. She packed light only essentials and a few precious belongings. She left letters for her father and Mary, explaining her choice and asking for understanding she knew would not come. She liquidated what money she could access and prepared to leave behind everything familiar. The Christmas social was held in the fort's main hall, decorated with pine boughs and candles. Rebecca attended in her best dress, playing the part of the colonel's daughter one last time. She danced with other officers, made small talk with the ladies, and avoided Thomas's increasingly anxious glances. At 11:30, she excused herself, claiming a headache. Instead of returning to her quarters, she slipped out of the fort and made her way through the darkness to the meeting point. Snow was falling steadily, covering her tracks and muffling any sound of her movement. Joseph was waiting for her with 2 horses and supplies for the journey. When he saw her approach, he dismounted and took her hands in his. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once we leave, there will be no going back." "I'm certain," she replied, though her voice shook slightly. "I would rather face an uncertain future with you than a certain misery without you." They mounted their horses and began the treacherous journey through the snowy mountains. Joseph led them along paths known only to his people, routes that would make tracking difficult if not impossible. They rode in silence for the first hour, both lost in their own thoughts about the magnitude of what they were doing. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Rebecca felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Every step took her further from the only life she had ever known, but also closer to the only future that seemed worth living. They stopped to rest the horses around 3 in the morning. Joseph built a small, smokeless fire and shared jerky and water with Rebecca. The snow had stopped, and the sky was clear and brilliant with stars. "Tell me about your people," Rebecca said. "What will they think of me?" Joseph was quiet for a moment. "Some will be suspicious. A white woman brings complications, but our war leader, my uncle, is practical. If you can contribute to the band's welfare, if you can adapt to our ways, you will be accepted in time. And if I can't adapt, then we will face that challenge together." He reached over and took her hand. "I will not let you face this alone." They resumed their journey as dawn broke. the horses picking their way carefully along increasingly narrow and treacherous paths. Rebecca had never been this far into the wilderness, and the vast emptiness was both beautiful and intimidating. She began to understand why the Apache fought so fiercely for this land. It was harsh but magnificent, demanding respect and offering freedom in return. By midday, they reached a valley where smoke rose from several fires. Joseph's band had made their winter camp in a sheltered area near a stream, with adequate game and protection from the worst weather. As they approached, Rebecca saw people emerging from wickiups and lean-tos, watching their arrival with curiosity and suspicion. Joseph called out in Apache, and an older man approached them. Rebecca recognized the bearing of a leader and knew this must be Joseph's uncle. The two men spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing occasionally toward Rebecca. She sat straight on her horse, trying to project confidence despite her exhaustion and fear. Finally, Joseph turned to her. "My uncle, Chief Gray Wolf, says you are welcome to stay until the spring thaw. What happens after that will depend on how well you adapt to our ways." Rebecca dismounted and approached the chief. She had learned enough Apache words to attempt a respectful greeting, which seemed to surprise and slightly amuse him. He responded in heavily accented English. "Joseph says you chose to leave your people for love. This shows either great wisdom or great foolishness. Time will tell which." The next few weeks were the most challenging of Rebecca's life. Everything was different: the food, the sleeping arrangements, the daily routines, even the way people related to each other. She had to learn to tan hides, to preserve meat, to make clothing from animal skins. Her hands, soft from her privileged life, became cracked and calloused. Her back ached from unfamiliar work. Some of the women were kind and patient teachers. Others remained aloof, waiting to see if she would give up and try to return to the white world. The children were openly curious about her pale skin and strange accent, following her around and giggling at her mistakes. Joseph was patient and encouraging, but he also had his own responsibilities to the band. He couldn't spend all his time helping her adjust. Rebecca quickly learned that survival in this new world depended on her own determination and adaptability. The hardest part was the loneliness. Despite Joseph's presence and the eventual acceptance of some band members, Rebecca felt isolated in ways she had never experienced. She missed books, missed music, missed the simple comfort of speaking her native language with people who shared her cultural references. But gradually, she began to find her place. Her education proved valuable when the band needed to deal with traders or government representatives who spoke only English. Her medical knowledge, limited though it was, helped when people were injured or sick. She learned to appreciate the Apache way of life, the close connection to the natural world, the emphasis on community survival, the practical equality between men and women in many aspects of daily life. Most importantly, her love for Joseph deepened as she saw him in his element. He was respected as both a warrior and a peacemaker, someone who could fight fiercely when necessary but preferred to resolve conflicts through negotiation. Watching him interact with his people, seeing the wisdom and compassion he brought to difficult decisions, Rebecca knew she had made the right choice. Spring came early that year, and with it, the time for the band to decide their next move. Government pressure was increasing, and there were rumors that all Apache would soon be forced onto reservations. Chief Gray Wolf called a council meeting to discuss their options. Rebecca was not invited to the formal council, but Joseph told her afterward what had been decided. The band would split up. Some members would try to reach Mexico, where Apache bands still roamed free. Others would surrender to the reservation system, hoping to preserve their children's lives even if they couldn't preserve their way of life. Joseph and a small group, including Rebecca, would try something different. They would establish a small settlement in a remote valley deeper in the mountains, living as peacefully as possible while maintaining their traditional ways. It was dangerous. They would have no protection if discovered by hostile forces, but it offered the best chance of maintaining their freedom and dignity. "What do you think?" Joseph asked Rebecca as they prepared for this new journey. Rebecca looked around the camp that had become her home, at the people who had slowly accepted her as one of their own. She thought about her father, probably still searching for her, still unable to understand her choice. She thought about Thomas Whitman and the life of comfortable slavery she had escaped. "I think," she said slowly, "that home isn't a place. It's the people you choose to build a life with." Joseph smiled and pulled her close. "Then we build our life together, whatever comes." But neither of them could have anticipated what was coming. Thomas Whitman had not given up his pursuit, and Colonel Martinez had not forgiven his daughter's betrayal. Even now, a combined force of soldiers and civilian volunteers was preparing to venture into the mountains, determined to bring Rebecca back and make an example of the Apache who had stolen her away. The final confrontation was approaching, and it would test everything Rebecca had learned about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of freedom. 3 months into their new life in the hidden valley, Rebecca had begun to believe they might actually build the peaceful existence Joseph envisioned. Their small band of 12 adults and 5 children had established a sustainable camp near a clear stream, with adequate game and natural shelter. Rebecca had learned to craft pottery from local clay and had taught several of the women to read English, skills that strengthened her position in the group. The illusion of safety shattered on a warm April morning when Joseph returned from hunting with news that chilled Rebecca's blood. He had seen signs of a large group of mounted men moving through the lower valleys, following Apache trails with the persistence of a military operation. "How many?" Chief Gray Wolf asked. "At least 20. Soldiers and civilians together. They have Apache scouts with them." Rebecca felt sick. She knew without being told that this search party was looking for her. Her father would never stop searching, and Thomas Whitman had the wealth and connections to organize a sustained effort. "They cannot know about this valley," one of the women said hopefully. Joseph shook his head grimly. "If they have Apache scouts, they will find every possible camp eventually. It is only a matter of time." That evening, the band held an urgent council. Rebecca was included this time, as the search party's presence was directly related to her. The discussion was conducted in a mixture of Apache and English, allowing her to follow most of the debate. Several band members argued for abandoning the valley immediately and fleeing deeper into the mountains. Others suggested that Rebecca should surrender herself to protect the group. A few warriors proposed fighting, though they were vastly outnumbered. Chief Gray Wolf listened to all opinions before speaking. "The woman came to us freely, choosing our way of life over her own people. We do not abandon those who have proven their loyalty, but we also cannot sacrifice children for one person's choice." Joseph stood up. "I propose a different solution. Rebecca and I will leave the valley and lead the search party away from the band. Once they follow us, the rest of you can move to the winter camp near the sacred springs. By the time they realize they are following only 2 people, you will be safely hidden." "Oh, that is suicide," Rebecca protested. "They have too many men." "Perhaps, but it gives our people the best chance of survival." Rebecca looked around the circle at faces that had become dear to her over the past months. These people had risked everything to accept her, had shared their food and knowledge and protection. Now her presence endangered them all. "Joseph is right," she said quietly, "but I should go alone. There's no reason for you to." "There is every reason," Joseph interrupted. "You are my woman. Where you go, I go." Chief Gray Wolf studied them both for a long moment. "It is decided. Joseph and Rebecca will leave at dawn and draw the search party south. The rest of us will move north to the sacred springs and wait for the soldiers to give up their hunt." That night, Rebecca lay beside Joseph under the stars, listening to the sounds of the sleeping camp. Tomorrow they would begin a desperate flight that would likely end in capture or death. She should have been terrified, but instead she felt a strange peace. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked softly. Joseph was quiet for so long she thought he had fallen asleep. Then he spoke. "I regret that our love brought danger to innocent people. I regret that the world makes it impossible for us to live peacefully together. But I do not regret loving you, and I do not regret fighting for our right to be together." even if it costs us everything. Especially then. They left before sunrise, taking only essential supplies and their two strongest horses. The plan was to create an obvious trail leading south toward the Mexican border, making it appear that the entire band was fleeing in that direction. Once the search party committed to following them, Joseph and Rebecca would try to lose their pursuers in the maze of canyons and mesas near the territorial border. For 2 days, the plan worked perfectly. They left clear signs of their passage: campfire remains, horse tracks, even a few small items that appeared to have been dropped accidentally. Behind them, they could see dust clouds indicating their pursuers were following the trail. On the third day, disaster struck. Their horses had been pushed hard for days and were beginning to tire. As they descended into a narrow canyon, Rebecca's mount stumbled on loose rock and went down hard. The horse scrambled to its feet, but it was clearly lame. Joseph examined the injury quickly. The leg is not broken, but he cannot carry you far. They were in the worst possible place for this to happen, a narrow canyon with high walls and limited exits. If the search party caught them here, there would be no escape. "You take both horses and go," Rebecca said. "I'll hide in the rocks until they pass." "No," Joseph's voice was final. "We stay together." They found a defensible position among the boulders near the canyon wall and waited. Within hours, they could hear voices echoing off the rock walls as the search party entered the canyon. Rebecca recognized her father's voice giving orders, and her heart clenched with unexpected grief. The search party had indeed been organized by Thomas Whitman, but it was led by Colonel Martinez himself. In addition to a dozen soldiers from the fort, Thomas had recruited civilian volunteers with promises of reward money. The group also included 2 Apache scouts who had been persuaded to help track the fugitives. Rebecca watched from their hiding place as the men spread out to search the canyon. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. She looked at Joseph, crouched beside her with his rifle ready, and made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "I'm going to surrender," she whispered. "No. Joseph, listen to me. If they find us here, they'll kill you immediately. If I surrender and claim you kidnapped me, you might have a chance to escape. I will not let you lie for me. And I will not let you die for me." Rebecca gripped his arm tightly. "Please, give me this chance to protect you for once." Before Joseph could stop her, Rebecca stood up and walked out of their hiding place with her hands raised. "Father," she called, "I'm here." The effect on the search party was immediate. Shouts echoed through the canyon as men converged on her position. Colonel Martinez reached her first, his face a mixture of relief, anger, and heartbreak. "Rebecca," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "thank God you're alive." "I'm fine, Father." Thomas Whitman pushed forward, his eyes scanning the rocks around them. "Where is he? Where's the Apache who took you?" "Gone," Rebecca said steadily. "He left me here when he realized you were following." It was a desperate lie, and she wasn't sure anyone would believe it. But it bought Joseph precious time to slip away through the rocks while all attention was focused on her. Colonel Martinez wrapped his daughter in his arms, holding her tightly. "We're taking you home," he said. "This nightmare is over." But as they prepared to leave the canyon, one of the Apache scouts returned with disturbing news. He had found fresh tracks leading deeper into the rock's tracks that suggested Rebecca had not been alone when they found her. Thomas Whitman's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "She's protecting him," he announced. "The Apache is still here." The search resumed with renewed intensity. Rebecca watched in growing desperation as the men combed through every possible hiding place. She prayed that Joseph had found a way out of the canyon, but her heart sank when she heard shouts from the far end of the gorge. They had found him. Joseph was dragged into the open at gunpoint, his hands bound behind his back. He looked directly at Rebecca, and she saw in his eyes not anger at her betrayal, but understanding and love. "So," Thomas said smugly, "the loving couple is reunited." Colonel Martinez looked between his daughter and Joseph, seeing clearly for the first time the truth he had been refusing to acknowledge. "You went with him willingly," he said, his voice flat with shock. Rebecca lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes. You betrayed everything I raised you to believe. I chose love over hatred. I chose freedom over fear. If that's betrayal, then yes, I betrayed you." The colonel's face went white with rage. "You chose to live with savages like an animal. I chose to live with people who accepted me as an equal, rather than property to be traded." Thomas stepped forward. "Enough of this romantic nonsense. The Apache dies, and Rebecca comes home to face the consequences of her actions." "No," Rebecca said sharply. "I will not let you murder him." "You have no say in the matter," Thomas replied coldly. But Colonel Martinez held up a hand. "Wait." He looked at his daughter with something that might have been curiosity. "You really love him. More than my own life. And you believe he loves you." "I know he does." The colonel was quiet for a long moment, studying Joseph with the calculating gaze of a military strategist. Finally, he spoke. "There is an old frontier custom," he said slowly. "Trial by ordeal. If this Apache truly loves my daughter, if he is willing to prove his devotion through suffering, then perhaps he has earned the right to live." Thomas looked alarmed. "Colonel, you can't be serious." "Dead serious." Martinez's voice carried the authority of command. "We will return to Fort Collins. The Apache will face trial by ordeal. If he survives, he goes free. If he dies, it will be according to frontier justice. Rebecca felt cold dread settling in her chest. She knew frontier justice, knew the casual brutality that often passed for law in the territories. What kind of trial? Her father's smile was thin and cruel. That will be decided by the good people of Fort Collins. The journey back to the settlement took 3 days. Joseph rode with his hands bound, flanked by armed guards. Rebecca was allowed to ride freely but was watched constantly. She tried several times to speak with Joseph, but the guards had orders to prevent any communication between them. On the second night, as they camped in a clearing, Rebecca overheard Thomas and her father discussing the upcoming trial. What she heard made her blood run cold. The plan was simple and savage. Joseph would be tied to a wagon wheel in the town square and left exposed to the elements. If he survived 3 days and nights without water, food, or shelter, he would be considered worthy of freedom. If he died, it would be considered divine judgment. It was a death sentence disguised as justice, and everyone knew it. Rebecca lay awake that night planning desperate escape attempts, but the guard was too tight and the stakes too high. Any attempt that failed would likely result in Joseph's immediate execution. When they reached Fort Collins, news of their arrival spread quickly. The entire town turned out to see the colonel's wayward daughter and her Apache lover. Rebecca endured the stares and whispers with her head held high, but she could see the bloodlust in many faces. Joseph had become a symbol of everything the townspeople feared and hated about the Apache. That evening, Colonel Martinez visited Rebecca in her locked room. "It's not too late," he said quietly. "Renounce him publicly. Claim he forced you to go with him. Marry Thomas as planned. The Apache dies, but you live as a respectable woman." No. Rebecca, be reasonable. This man has destroyed your reputation, your future, everything I worked to build for you. This man gave me the first real happiness I've ever known. I will not betray him to save a reputation I never wanted. Her father studied her face, seeing perhaps for the first time the woman she had become rather than the child he remembered. "You really would rather die with him than live without him?" "Yes." "Then God help you both." The next morning, the entire town gathered in the square to witness the beginning of Joseph's ordeal. A wagon wheel had been erected in the center of the open space, and Joseph was brought out in chains.